Hello, and welcome to our webinar, 2018 Tariff Update, covering Section 301 and Section 232. I'm Nick Esposito. I'll be your host today. I'm TRG's Business Development Manager, and one of my cherished responsibilities is that to be an educator, specifically when it comes to these webinars. We love putting them together, and I sincerely hope you guys all enjoy them. Joining me today is Gregg Cummings, who is the Managing Partner of Strix and a licensed customs broker, as well as frequent presenter in our webinars and co-collaborator on this tariff series of webinars. Also joining us today from our sister company Strix is Tanner Jackson, Director of Brokerage Operations and a licensed customs broker. From TRG, we have Rachel Bowman, Bond Claims Manager. Rachel specializes in reviewing and analyzing customs data in order to assist importers in the claims resolution process. Also joining us today from TRG is Travis Smith, National Sales Manager here at TRG. Travis has spent close to a decade in the customs bonds and cargo insurance markets. This webinar is being presented by Strix and Trade Risk Guaranty. We're located in the heart of downtown Bozeman, Montana. If you're ever in town, don't forget to stop by our shared office space on the second floor of the historic Rocking R Bar building. Both companies operate on a direct-to-importer business model that is unique to the international trade community. As an important disclaimer, the information presented in this webinar is for information purposes only and is not intended and does not constitute legal advice. We will be recording this webinar and it will be available on YouTube for future reference. To be notified the moment it releases and to keep a pulse on TRG's educational videos, I highly recommend you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Finding our channel is as simple as typing Trade Risk Guarantee, YouTube into Google and clicking the first result. If you have any questions during the presentation, submit it via the questions section of the webinar interface. The questions will be reviewed and answered by myself or our team of licensed customs brokers at the end of or shortly after the webinar. If you have any additional questions outside the webinar, or if you'd like to be part of a community of trade professionals, join our Facebook group, International Trade Professionals-TRG. We frequently check the group for questions and encourage our members to start conversations amongst themselves if they have a common problem. All right, let's hand it over to Gregg.
All right, thank you, Nick, and it's certainly a pleasure to speak with you all again. The trade wars continue unabated, and of course, there's a tremendous amount of industry interest from the trade on what's going on, what can we do, tell us a little bit more about what's going on, and more importantly, what are you seeing out there? What's happening in the trade since these lists have come out and the increased tariffs have begun to be put in place? We wanted to start today because we have such a diverse group of people who have signed up for today's webinar to kind of start a little bit from the beginning. There's been a lot of questions, and I think I'll just take a minute to say, as far as questions are concerned, usually we like to open things up at the end and take live questions. We simply won't be able to do that today. Even before we set up today's program, we had over 250 questions. So one of the things we were able to do was kind of go through that list of questions and come up with some of the most important from a compliance standpoint and frequently asked questions. So we do have a number of those at the end, but we're also going to take a look at each question individually, and where there are some specific kind of company-oriented things, we're gonna respond to you directly. So your questions are very important because it's a very dynamic atmosphere out there. So where are we? Okay. Most of us are very aware, obviously, of the two sections that have been put in place over the past 6 months. We've got Section 232, which is steel mill and alumina articles, as specified in the presidential proclamations, and further, we've got Section 301, which are very specific to products with Chinese origins, and those lists have, of course, been published as well. So we'll start with just a brief recap on 232, and 232 is specific to steel and aluminum. Now, this section was put in place really based on a very interesting piece of legislation that goes back to 1962. And this was the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, and it stated that if an article that was being imported into the United States in quantity or under unusual circumstances that could threaten or impair our national security, then the Department of Commerce could step in. They would do a study and come up with a determination as to whether that item could be a threat to U.S. national security. If the president then concurred, then he had the authority to adjust imports, including, as we've seen, through tariffs and quotas. So, as has been part of this administration, if they can find the authority, they are using the authority. And so that was kind of the background on 232. And the interesting thing with 232 as well is it covered the world. It was a global HTS proclamation, so it was not specific to China. Very specifically within it, you had a 25% tariff on steel imports. This went into effect on June 1st, 2018, so it's been out there for a while. And there have been a number of countries who've negotiated directly with the U.S. to work out exceptions, and those being Argentina, Australia, Brazil, and South Korea. And most of those exemptions included being covered under an absolute quota basis. So there are a few exemptions. But the rest of the world is subject to 25% tariff on those specific imports as designed under the HTS. Of course, anything that is of United States origin is not subject to that, so if it went out of the country and came back in, you would not be subject to that tariff. Further under 232, aluminum would be tariffed at a 10% rate. This also went into effect on June 1st, and all countries of origin subject to this tariff except Argentina and Australia, who did negotiate specific deals directly. Argentina set up an absolute quota, and imports from South Korea would use a non-quota entry type code when bringing in goods from there. Everything else is subject to 10%, and again, this has been in effect since June. So the trade has kind of had a little bit of time to work with this, but it is and still remains very much in effect. An important part of 232, and we had a number of questions that were asking specifically about drawback and whether drawback was available in respect to 232, and it is very specifically not. So I know there's many people on here who are quite expert in importation and understand what drawback is, but many of you don't, so I'm just going to touch on that for a minute. So let's say that you had a supply chain that in the past brought in steel or aluminum into the United States. You entered it through LA. It then went to a warehouse. You then set up your supply chain to go from there to wherever your customers may be. If your customers were then in either Mexico or Canada, and you brought those goods in duty-free, as many of the HTSs were, then it didn't really matter. Your supply chain worked. You brought the goods in efficiently through LA, took to a warehouse where you could deconsol them, and then split up your orders as needed. Okay? However, that entry was made and cleared at the Port of LA, which meant all the duties and fees associated with those products would have been paid at that time. So what about now? Okay? Things are a little more complicated now, because under that same supply chain scenario, if you bring the goods in and clear them, you are subject to the quotas. Even if you then have the final destination be Canada or Mexico, you're still subject to them, and you cannot draw back those duty rates through the process of filing a drawback claim. Now, it's also interesting to note that under the new ACE program with customs, drawback has become a very, very complex process. If you want to avoid either having to look, well, you can't have drawback for 232, but if you want to look at what you do, you now have to manage your supply chain back a little bit further. Now those goods, if they are destined for either Mexico or Canada, and you can either create an LCL or a container shipment specific to those destinations, you have to set up an immediate transportation bond or immediate export bond to make sure they never clear or touch U.S. commerce. It's easy to do, but you have to manage things a little bit tighter. If you do that, then you won't be subject to these tariffs. You can get your goods at a good price to that destination. They will then be cleared in Mexico or Canada instead of the U.S., where hopefully those rates aren't as high as the tariffs that are in place now. So it's very important to understand that you can't escape the tariffs once they're paid on 232 items. Okay, a lot of questions on drawback. So I got into it a little bit, and of course is much more complicated than that, but that's kind of a quick understanding of what you're subject to under 232. Now, 232 may not be over. Okay, so as part of the beginning studies done by the Department of Commerce, they've also self-initiated an investigation back in May to determine whether imports of automobiles that would include SUVs, vans, light trucks, as well as auto parts may be harming U.S. national security. Now, in this case, Department of Commerce has 270 days to conclude that investigation and then look at if any resultant actions should be imposed. It would then happen via presidential proclamation, but it would happen quickly. Okay? These things could go into place within 15 days. The president would determine that it was a national security risk. So, as with many things, and this came out in a lot of the questions working up to this webinar, you've got to stay informed. You have got to be reading and keeping up with the news. If you are part of the either automobile or auto parts industry and you're bringing goods in, stay tuned, because if it happens, it could happen quickly. And another, kind of distressing series of questions we saw a lot of involved contracts. Okay? For those of you who are looking to set up contracts into the future, put an HTS clause in there regarding your cost of goods to your potential buyers. Please, please do that. We had a lot of questions. Goods coming in, subject to tariffs. You've got a contractual obligation to the buyer at a specific cost, and all of a sudden your profit's gone or you're even at a loss. It's really tough stuff, and we really, it was tough to read some of these questions because we know a number of you are in some tight spots out there. And we really don't know how to answer. We're not contract lawyers here. But certainly there are some very extenuating circumstances around the current tariff situation for goods coming to the U.S. that have happened quickly and with great cost. So you're going to have to talk to, unfortunately, your lawyer to see if there are ways to break contracts. If you can't get that negotiation direct with the buyer and get them to understand what's going on, certainly they know, but sometimes people just play tough. So, for those of you setting up contracts today, looking to the future, make sure you've got that clause in there to safeguard your cost and your profit going forward. Another section that the Department of Commerce has self-initiated regards uranium ore. Thankfully, there's probably very few of you out there today who bring in uranium ore, but it's kind of the same subject. They've got 270 days to conclude the investigation, at which point, if it was determined to be a national security risk, you could see action within 15 days. All right, on to the elephant in the room, Section 301. Okay, Section 301 has now been with us for a number of months. And it really, we've got a lot of questions. Why the heck are we here? How did this happen? What is going on? Why is all of a sudden tariffing China in particular become so important? And it's important to understand that for many years, 15, 20 years, U.S. companies who would go and set up business in China were subject to a very lopsided and unfair technology transfer requirement. So if we go and we set up a business in China, China's requirement is that you sell and offer up your technology to them when you set up that business, oftentimes you must have either a high minority or even a majority stake in a Chinese company to be partnered with, at which point you've lost your technology, you've lost your brand, you've lost, something that's very important to hard work and costs and things that you've done for many years. Okay, it has been determined to be unfair for a long period of time. The licensing restrictions when you're setting up a new company in China are very onerous and, again, oftentimes require technology transfer. Outbound investment has very clearly targeted, with government support, some of our important industries. Okay, and it's okay if we all compete on an even playing field, but if you've got government support, it is determined to not be fair. And on the backhand side, we have clear evidence where China has, through government-backed sources, created cyber theft, intellectual property theft, and theft of sensitive commercial information. This has been determined. It's been in place. So really what we've experienced for a long time are administrations that have rolled with it. They have wanted free trade in lieu of free and fair trade or free and fairer trade. Okay, this administration, better or worse, has decided that no longer can stand. We need to level the playing field for U.S. companies. And the fact is that this is all in place because many U.S. companies have continually gone to the administration and talked about how unfair the playing field is when dealing with Chinese. So that's why we're here. And so, as we've seen in many circumstances, this administration plays hardball, they play fast, they play brinksmanship, and they play to win. So, we as importers are kind of suffering a little bit because of how quickly this has come into place. But Section 301 in particular has been a cascading series of lists that started out small and now have become quite encompassing. So here's what they are. List 1, 25% tariff, specifically on products from China. This originally included 818 items, valued at $34 billion. Okay, for all of us who know how many billions of commerce we do with China, it was considered to be kind of small. This went into effect on July 6th of this year. The deadline for exclusions is still out there. It's closing fast. It's October 9th, but for those of you who still want to file an exclusion, you can do so. October 9th is that deadline. Now, one nice thing about 301 is it is eligible for drawback. So if your supply chain brings goods in, clears them, puts them into a warehouse, and then they export either out of the country to Europe, Canada, Mexico, wherever, you can apply for and set up a drawback claim. So that is, somewhat good news. Hopefully we don't have to further change our supply chain in lieu of that. But it's also very important to note these tariffs are based on the country of origin, not the country of export. So I'm going to stop right there again. Lot of questions on this. Obviously, nobody wants to pay 25%. And we'll talk about the other lists in a second as well. But tariffs are 25%, tariffs are 10%, tariffs are 25%. The country of origin is the country of origin. We've had a lot of questions. What if there is an office? What if my manufacturer is in China, but they have an office in Vietnam? Can I have that be the country of export or country of origin? And the answer, ladies and gentlemen, it's no. Okay. One of the things that has happened in the past couple of years is Customs has dramatically updated their computer systems. The system is ACE, the Automated Commercial Environment. The data that Customs has access to now is incredible. The programs, and I know for a fact they've hired NSA coders to come in and write programs to search through and mine your import data. Please understand, they know what's going on out there. They know if 100 million tons of a product came out of China last year, 10 million tons came out of Vietnam, and now all of a sudden 50 million tons are coming out of Vietnam this year. Probably the manufacturing capacity wasn't the sole reason for that, okay? We must ask you, please be prudent. Do not try to find ways to either change your HTS to be a product that it is not. Customs will find that out. Rachel will tell you a little bit later how bad that is and what will happen to you. They will find you. They will also find if you're diverting goods. They will find it. Okay? They are inspecting ports. They will be inspecting specific products that are part of these lists. So nobody likes this. Nobody's going to like it, but we've got to be compliant. So please think compliance first when you do these things. And if you try and take a chance, understand you are likely to get caught and pay, at the very least, the duties that you didn't pay, that should have been paid, and further, they could come after you for fines and penalties beyond that. So please be careful. List 2, 25% imposed, again, on items from China. This was a slightly smaller tranche. Originally contained 284 items. It's now down to 279. So very interesting. You know, we've been looking closely to see if you file an exclusion, and there were thousands of exclusions that were filed, how many were granted? Okay, that's important. We want to see, you know, if there's been some relief from this. And we can tell you, at least in this tranche, very, very little, very, very few items in the end of the day were excluded. So again, these tariffs went into effect on August 23rd. So they've been out there about a month, a little over a month. The exclusion period is still in effect and will be till December 18th. So if you fall under List 2, you still can file for an exclusion. As in List 1, these are eligible for drawback. Again, country of origin, not country of export. Now, List 3. Oh, these are List 2 products. Actually, I mentioned, what were the tariff codes that did get excluded, and these were the ones that were part of the exclusion set for List 2. So 5 items out of several hundred, and so you know. It's not impossible, but it's certainly on a percentage basis isn't looking good. And we'll talk a little bit about, you know, filing of exclusions a little bit later. All right, so List 3. So why do we have List 3? Okay, well, essentially you have a brinksmanship, very high stakes game of commerce and possible. Well, I guess you could say for sure we're in a trade war right now, going on between China and the United States. China does not want to lose face. China certainly is trying to understand what's going on both with this administration and the political climate within the United States. And so they're playing brinksmanship back. Okay? Right now, List 3 was in response to List 1 and 2 having a response from China, in addition to trade talks that were scheduled being canceled. So, you know, as we all watch the brinksmanship continue, this list was aimed to hurt. It was very broad, very wide-ranging. It's got 5,744 items, down from, I think, 5,800, so some exclusions have been granted so far. But the value is $200 billion. It is very wide-ranging. Okay, it's hitting a lot of people. Obviously, that's why many of you are on here today. Now, today it's 10%, okay, which is essentially saying, come on, China, let's talk. We had talks scheduled. They got mad. They say we've got a knife to their throat. They don't negotiate with a knife to their throat. So really, what they're probably saying is we're waiting for elections. We're going to see what the tone is in the United States and whether or not the elections are going to change how this administration is approaching these tariff schemes and what they're trying to do with China. So if nothing happens, and or if they respond, don't respond at all, then it's designed to go up to 25% on January 1st. So again, those of you out there today, okay, we've got over 3 months until that tariff goes up by another 15%. Understand that in your purchasing. Understand that in your contracts, your cost of goods, your profitability. Look at it today. Be prepared for it. Hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully we get some talks. Hopefully post-elections, some things start to work. And maybe just by getting to the table, the move to 25 will be delayed. Hopefully, okay? But let's also be pragmatic and let's understand where we could be hurt, okay? Exclusions, the final date has not been announced. So if you're putting together exclusions, you've got a while to do so, and we would expect that date to extend well into January at least. These goods are eligible for drawback, okay, and good. And again, country of origin, not country of export. Now what? Is there going to be a list 4? Okay, we've already heard rumblings about this. Okay, so very specifically and publicly, U.S. has announced if China takes retaliatory action against farmers, other industries, then we'll look at a list 4. That list 4 is expected to encompass pretty much everything else and be worth $267 billion from an import value basis on goods from last year. So no, we don't know this is going to happen. Watch the news and you're going to get an idea if it's going to. If things continue to be sour, if there is reciprocity from China that includes and takes aim at our farmers, and of course this is a political battle, right? The heartland was deemed to be a large voting bloc for the current administration. Let's go hit the farmers, those kinds of industries, and affect the voting. So this is a very high stakes game, and so we've got to keep our eyes peeled. We've got to see what's happening next. But if they do that, you could expect a list 4, and at that point, it's more like what's not on it versus what's on it. So again, we don't know that that's going to happen. It's been preliminarily discussed, so we don't have any ideas on the tariffs that are included or anything like that. But we could expect that there's not much more that it could cover. So let's talk a little bit about those retaliatory measures and what's going on out there in response to what we've done with both 232 and 301. China, of course, has been subject to both sections. On 232, they have responded back with 15% tariffs on 120 items, 25 on 8, and for the 3 lists of 301, 25% on most items, with 20, 10, and 5% on a number of items. The effective dates for those, most of those are in place, with the final list having gone into effect in conjunction with our tariffs this past Monday. Okay, so as happens in the trade wars, the responses are coming on our exports to them. Now, Canada, as you know, is still in negotiations, technically, on NAFTA. Trudeau has been a little bit unresponsive, and so though whether or not NAFTA, which has been negotiated with Mexico, will include Canada is still up in the air. Trudeau is getting a tremendous amount of pressure from their business communities in Ontario and Quebec. The biggest voting bloc for people who've put him into power are the businesses, many of them obviously who are auto related, that are critical. The price points are critical to their exports to the United States. Canada has a trade deficit with the United States, so it's a little bit, there's a lot of questions from our Canadian friends. Why the heck are you doing it to us? We've got a deficit with you. But we've stopped trying to answer questions on what the current administration does. But suffice to say that hopefully those negotiations will get back on track. He may, like China, be waiting for the elections to take place and try to put a finger in the air at that point and see which way the wind's blowing. But hopefully they will come in, and that deal will protect the auto industry from a NAFTA point of view and any increased possible tariffs that could happen there. Mexico, although they have put in place a new NAFTA agreement, did respond on 232 on a list of tariffs that went into effect on June 5th and another list that went into effect on July 5th. The EU responded, of course, primarily in 232 on steel and aluminum. Very important imports of steel from the EU, and they responded very heavily on some of our products in the 50%, 35%, 25% range. Those have been in effect now for almost 6 months. India, likewise, taking a hard stance on some items, but as you can see, the actual number of items is a little bit small, but they're taking a tough stance where they can as well. Those are all in effect as well. Now, interesting here, Turkey, not going to stand for it. 140% on whiskey, 120% on vehicles, thereby completely eliminating drunk driving in the country of Turkey. Hardcore and another 536 items. All of these are now in place as of June. We'll see what happens. We've got a rhetorical war as well as trade war with Turkey going on right now. A number of political issues at bay there. Russia, of course, a lot of steel coming in from Russia, a lot of imported steel. So they are responding quite harshly to exports from us to them. All of these are in effect. So the trade wars live. We set things out, responses happen. But what's very important to understand is, as you know, at TRG, we've got over 12,000 customs bonds. So we have a very unique insight into what's going on with importation and, in particular, liquidation. And we're going to have Rachel talk just for a minute about some of the unique things we've seen, especially with 232 tariffs, and how the liquidation of those entries has changed from what we have seen in the past. So, Rachel, if you could give us a little insight into what we've been seeing the past couple of months on this.
Yeah, so in the past, with a standard liquidation timeline, we'd seen entries liquidate about 314 days after the date of entry. And we could pretty much set a calendar to that. And with 232 tariffs, we started seeing liquidations within 3 to 4 months. I, in particular, in the bond claims department, started seeing that trend because we started seeing bills issued for additional duties for these 232 tariffs. It's kind of conjecture as to why that's happening so much quicker, but it could be due to the extremely volatile nature of these tariffs changing constantly.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think it's important to note that this is entirely experiential right now. This is what we're seeing within our book of customers. Okay, Customs has said nothing about this. We've seen no pieces of information come out and talking about increased liquidation time. So we're hoping for the best. Okay, and what we've got on the screen right now is actually a couple of those direct experiences with 232 imports going back to March and April, and these were high value shipments. High value duty. And these were specifically for aluminum, but we've seen it in both steel and aluminum, where you brought in the goods at the end of March, mid-April, and they were liquidated by mid-July, end of July. So I'm not sure if that's good news from a standpoint that they're being tariffed at a higher rate, but from a risk point of view, this is very important for you, because liquidation is that final assessment of the money that you owe to customs. And knowing that that entry has been liquidated and technically customs is done with it is a good thing, because for the majority of your imports, that's it. That's the final phase. And if that final tally is going to continue to be determined by a shorter period of time, then your surety is very happy, and I would say that you're happy too as a corporation, because your risk tail is now ending earlier. Okay, so Again, we've got no specific news coming out of customs on this, but this is what we're seeing. So do stay tuned, because we're probably going to be doing at least a monthly, if not a bi-monthly webinar on these items to keep you up to date. We've got blogs and we've got other news items that are coming out, so we will be making sure that you see what we see just as quickly as we've got that news or that experience going on. So again, I talked a little bit about this. It means if you've got unliquidated entries out to that 314 day, that's an open liability for both you and your surety. So surety cares a lot about this. And we would say you do too. I mean, most of us watch our entries liquidate kind of on a regular basis without much happening. But that's the amount of time the customs has to say, you know what? That entry is incorrect, and here's why, and here's your duty bill. So the quicker you understand that, and the quicker it's done, the better. I'm now going to kick it over to Travis Smith, who's the National Sales Manager at TRG, and he's going to talk a little bit about the tariff atmosphere and how it's affecting marine cargo insurance.
Thank you, Greg. On the insuring front, cargo policies may need a higher uplift than the standard 10%. The 10% uplift has been the accepted means of accounting for ancillary fees, such as duties and taxes. Now, if you're now paying 10 to 25% in addition to your usual taxes, you'll want to address this with your current insurance provider by either increasing the uplift or including duty in the valuation. By including the 10 to 25% tariffs in your valuation, you will effectively be increasing the value insured and can expect a slight uptick in premium. Also, it is very important to revisit your per loss limit. In the case of a claim, if exposure on a given shipment exceeds the policy limit, an underinsuring penalty will be imposed on the claim, potentially costing the insured thousands. For more insight into tariffs and how they affect your cargo insurance, check out our previous webinar titled How Tariffs Affect Your Marine Cargo Insurance on your YouTube channel. Now, on the bond side, bond increases are being required in a shorter time frame. How short? The traditional window that had been in place for years was 45 days. Shortly after the tariffs were introduced, we saw increases being required after 30 days. Recently, it's dropped to a very quick 15 calendar days, and in some cases, bonds are being deemed insufficient immediately with effectively no window to increase. Once a bond has been deemed insufficient, the importer will not be able to continue importing until a new bond has been placed. Use the TRG worksheet that has been provided and work with your bond provider to ensure you're well ahead of these possible bond increases. In short, on bond and cargo insurance, follow the reoccurring theme of this webinar. You must be proactive. Also, team with agencies that are proactive and agencies that are educated about these increases. And now back to Greg.
All right, thanks, Travis. And I think you may know of some people who've been some importers who've had the unhappy event of seeing their bond be increased by a tremendous amount under this atmosphere. We've of course seen we've seen just about everything, especially on 232. Imagine if you were bringing in $100 million worth of product duty-free, and now all of a sudden you're subject to $25 million in duties. Customs put an algorithm together very quickly, and in several instances terminated bonds immediately. We had customers coming in on Monday morning going, I don't understand why I can't do my entry today. Why is my bond insufficient? They never got a letter from Customs. It was rendered insufficient immediately. Now, the good news is we're not seeing that today with 301, but what we are seeing is, as Travis mentioned, this much shorter timeline to get a new bond in place. So you can be assured that Customs is looking at your entered value for the past year, looking at what came out of China, looking at what a 25% tariff on that's going to be, and you know what it's going to do to your bond. So if you are working through the year and you're looking at bond sufficiency and the amount of duties that are going against your bond, it's a very simple formula. It's 10% of the duties and fees that you pay. Okay? You've got to be forward looking on this, because surety looks at bonds and their exposure based on each and every bond that is outstanding with unliquidated entries. And here's what I mean by that. Let's say right now we're in September, almost October of 2018. Let's say your bond sufficiency used to have a $500,000 bond, and you've been under a tariff regime now for a couple of months, which has kicked that up. And the annualized for 2018 looks like it's going to be about $1 million, okay? So you should have, or looks like it's going to be $10 million. So instead of a $500,000 bond, you should have $1 million bond. Okay? Customs will see that data, send you a letter, and then suggest that that bond needs to be increased. But now, if we're going through the rest of this year to 25% on all your goods out of China, and or could be going to that in January of next year, you've got to be forward looking. You've got to take a look at what you think the annualized amount of your duties and fees are going to be from here, because otherwise Customs could come back to you in the first quarter of next year, render your bond insufficient again, and require you to up that again. Now, if you're surety, now you've got unliquidated entries on a $500,000 bond, $1 million bond, and then perhaps a $2 million bond. That's financially a problem for many importers, because many sureties are requiring letters of credit. They're seeing risk that they've never seen before because of the differing financial conditions of importers. Okay? Importers themselves have never seen this before. It is a dynamic time out there. Please take a look at this. If you don't understand what could happen, call an agent at TRG, call us at Strix. We'll help walk you through it and take a look at what could be. There is a free list out there right now where you can pop in your tariff code and see if you're going to be subject to the increased tariffs on a forward basis. Let's do that. Let's be proactive. You don't want to have too much bond exposure out there, because if you all of a sudden have to go to a VP in the company and say, well, I need $1 million because a letter of credit is required for our customs bond, and I'm going to need another $2 million because another one's going to be required in another month, and that wasn't expected, and if we don't do it, our bond's going to go insufficient, we can't import. That might not be a great conversation. Okay, and it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, of course, but I can tell you it's happening out there. Let's be on top of this. Let's understand it as quickly as we can before it gets tough. Because if you've got to get a letter of credit, a lot of times that doesn't happen in a day or two. Okay, financials, negotiations with the bank, cash. Where am I going to get the cash from? How's that going to work? I've got to meet with VPs in the firm. Maybe they're in town. Maybe they're not in town. Who knows? So, suffice to say, let's stay on top of it. Stay informed, please. We're going to put out as much information on this as we can, but think compliance, okay? Let's be out in front of how this may affect your business. I know it's going to affect all of you, perhaps in varying and different ways, but let's get under this as quickly as we can. For those of you looking to file exclusions against the lists. And of course, we saw some interest from list 1, we saw some interest from list 2. Okay, list 3, huge. Okay, here is where you would file those lists, or here's the web address that you would use to file that exclusion. But let's talk a little bit about what filing an exclusion entails. Okay, now we're going to take list 2 as an example here. List 2 is subject to 25% tariff, went into effect on August 23rd. You still have until December 18th to file an exclusion. What has to be in that exclusion. Now, I'm going to tell you, go hire a lawyer to make sure you've got what you need to, but so you know, each has to identify the product in terms of its physical characteristics, what distinguish it from other products within that 8-digit HTS subheading. You have to include what the 10-digit HTS number is, and you have to include what the annual quantity and value of the Chinese origin product is that you're requesting that exclusion from for the past 3 years, okay? Must be part of it. If it's not part of it, it will be rejected outright, okay? In addition, to be successful, the bar is a little bit high, so you got to know whether or not that product is available only from China and whether a comparable product is available from sources in the U.S. or third countries. Okay, now, what's a quick way to avoid 301? Go find if you can make it in Vietnam or Indonesia or somewhere else. Okay, that's not rocket science. Most people are already doing that. Okay, but you know what the Department of Commerce wants to see is whether or not, you know, in the first place this is harming a U.S. company, and whether or not it's available. Now, many questions. Hey, we're bringing in bauxite from China. Bauxite there's 100 million tons produced or imported and used in the United States a year. U.S. producers only produce 10 million. They can't possibly produce all of the product that is needed for U.S. commerce. Okay? Explain that. Explain that that's an issue for your product, how it would affect you economically, how would it affect your company, the people you hire. Okay, that's important, or any other U.S. interest that may be involved. The people you are supplying the good to. Okay, very important. And understand what the Made in China 2025 program is. Whether or not you have a strategically important one that is related to the Made in China 2025. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, China has come out and very specifically targeted businesses and industrial sectors, technology sectors they want to win at. Okay? And it's been made very publicly, and it's been made in conjunction with support from the government. So it is deemed to be something that is unfair. Okay, so include these when you're thinking about an exclusion, and you've got a much higher ability, hopefully, to have that exclusion be accepted. As I mentioned, there's an HTS lookup code that has been put out. It's been updated for all the lists. As of this morning, it is absolutely up to date. So I think you've got that with your that's available on both the website and from the links that we send out. And again, as we mentioned earlier, and as we've seen with many of the questions out there, companies, you in particular, have very specific things that you do from an importation supply chain point of view. If you want specific consultation, you can talk with us. We are licensed customs brokers. We do this every day. Hopefully, we can help. So as I mentioned in the beginning, these are the items we covered. We have a very long list of questions. And what we've done is we've gone through and tried to hit those that were kind of the most frequently asked questions, as well as ones that are important from a compliance point of view. So I'm going to have Tanner join me here and talk a little bit about some of these. But this was a very wide-ranging question, Tanner. What is the new tariff amount in addition to the current duty rate I'm already paying for my good?
Hey, Greg. This is all fantastic stuff, and we are going to appreciate this as well, having all this information kind of available in one spot. Our team of customs brokers has been having a lot of these same conversations with our clients all week, so definitely very timely stuff. To your question right there, yes, these tariffs are in addition to the already applicable duty rates that apply to any classification. So if your duty rate prior to these release of tariffs, whether Section 232 or Section 301, if that prior duty rate was 3%, and the commodity you're importing is now subject to an additional 25% tariff, your total rate on that import is now 28%. This is not a case of a 25% increase or a 10% increase on that previous tariff amount. You are effectively stacking tariffs.
Very important to understand. So you paid 3% before on the value of the goods. Now you're paying an additional 25% of the value of the goods, totaling 28. Okay? It is designed to be hurtful to China. It's designed to be that. And here's what an entry looks like for a good being entered today. And you can see that additional 99 tariff code section that's added in addition to the original tariff, and maybe talk just a second about that, Tanner.
Absolutely. So CBP is using this additional tariff code tool in order to ask filers to report whether or not their tariff code is subject to one of these lists. In our example here, we can see that the tariff code, the primary tariff code being reported, is the code 9903-8803, indicating that this 10-digit tariff code reported below is on list 3 of the Section 301 tariffs. As you can see here, the 99 code is the primary tariff code reported, and the 10-digit classification for that imported product is the secondary tariff code reported.
And this is a look from an entry we did this week. So original tariff code 2.6% duty, additional list 3 tariff code 10%, so a healthy increase. But that's how you set it up, and that's how that customs entry now works. So a lot of questions about, does your HTS code change? And Tanner, I'll let you talk about this for a second. It doesn't change. It's just that there is an additional HTS code that is added to that entry.
That's correct, Greg. So the 99 code that has been designated by CBP, and forgive my shorthand there, but the 99 code we are mentioning is a 8-digit HTS code from Chapter 99 used by CBP to designate either temporary duty rates for legislation, for other modifications that they're making. This is in lieu of a change to the actual HTS code that is the classification for your goods.
So you're guaranteeing these are temporary?
You can certainly quote me on that. We certainly hope that we will see them be quite temporary. But if, to your earlier points, we're seeing quite a bit of escalation here, so we'll see whether that is the case in the future.
So I see a 99 code down there that's 04. List 4 is in place?
Greg, as you well know, all things with CBP are crystal clear, intended for simple consumption and digestion. No, the 99 code 9903-8804 indicates a subset of goods that are subject to list 3 of the Section 301 tariffs. Several tariff codes at the 10-digit level have been accepted from the 301 duty increases, even though their 8-digit headings appear on list 3. If your 10-digit tariff code appears on the relatively short list of exempted HTS codes, your entry will not include a Chapter 99 code. If, however, your 10-digit code is not on the list of exempt HTS codes and the 8-digit heading is included on list 3, then HTS code 9903-8804 will be reported as that primary tariff code on the invoice line in the entry. So as you can see, extremely straightforward, simple to understand. Even the most layperson of all of us could understand this.
Well, I hope so, because I have no idea what you just said. So suffice to say, there are some details within this that can be very sticky. We do remain available if you think you're subject to some of these things for counsel. So please let us know. We got a little tongue-in-cheek here, of course, but there are some complexities here that it simply can't be avoided. So hopefully we're going to all be able to navigate through this successfully and move on. So couple other important questions. So the tariffs that are being implemented, are they being implemented on the vessel arrival, or on the clearance date?
Greg, this is another topic on which there seems to be a lot of misinformation and misconception. I've personally had dozens of conversations already this week regarding time of entry and how to determine whether a shipment will be subject to a duty rate increase. As we're discovering, CBP rarely provides any easy answers, and this question is not an exception to that. Most simply, if I can, duty is calculated on the date of entry. Entry is made when goods are physically present at the port and an entry is filed. So just to be clear, filing an entry before a shipment arrives at the port does not alone cause that shipment to be entered. There are further complexities involved with shipments moving in bond, inland, etc. But the important thing to remember is that the earliest that entry can be made is the date on which the goods arrive at the port of unlading.
And for our more sophisticated importers out there, you know about the IT date, and that's what Tanner's referring to here. If in case you are clearing goods at an interior port, it is the tariff will be in place when the IT is accepted. Correct?
Correct. And keep in mind, though, that acceptance of that IT is contingent upon the arrival date in that port. The goods must be physically present for entry to be accepted by CBP, whether that's an IT entry, an entry for consumption, or any other filing.
All right, great. Thank you. Lot of questions on that one. Hopefully we helped out. In addition to that, kind of the good news is that unlike AD/CVD, these import tariffs are being applied on entries only after the implementation date. There is no retroactivity. They are not clawing back 1 month, 2 month, 3 months. That's really good news. So, the implementation dates that we put in place are the correct ones.
Just to clarify that point one little bit, Greg, the exemptions to Section 232 and 301 duties will be retroactive. If you are granted an exception, that will be retroactive to the implementation date for those duties. However, that does not mean that duties will be applied retroactively if your goods are subject.
Okay, good. All right, so who adds the tariff amount? Who's it paid to? And is there any additional paperwork?
So these are tariffs added by CBP. These are, in effect, stacked tariffs, Greg. So is there additional paperwork? Only in the ways in which we just covered concerning the additional tariff codes you may need to file with if your goods are subject to these additional duties. The duties are paid directly to CBP at the time that your regular duty bill is paid. Of course, it's the importer's responsibility to ensure that these additional tariff codes are included on that entry so that the calculation is accurate and duty is paid timely for that particular shipment.
So, and I think we had that example up earlier. So it's all part of the same 7501 entry summary, duties and fees stacked and paid just like you've been doing it in the past. All right, so when are they going into effect? 232, very specifically on steel, 25%, went into effect June 1st. Aluminum, 10%, went into effect June 1st. Department of Commerce, still outstanding in their studies for automobiles and auto parts, and uranium. Section 301, List 1, 25%, in effect as of June 1st. List 2, 25%, in effect as of August 23rd. List 3, currently 10%, in effect September 24th, can possibly go to 25% on 1/1 of 19. List 4, we say it's under review. I hope not. Hopefully hopefully we don't see that. So these imports are all classified, again, under specific HTS codes, regardless of it's new or used, and they will be in effect until determined otherwise. Is your HTS code subject to the tariffs? Okay, and we just put a couple up here based on some of our question streams that we'd seen. and you can see the tariffs on the left-hand side. We've got goods involving building stone, toys, appliances, tableware, kitchenware, coffee and tea makers. And so, you know, we've got some that come in under List 3 and are in place today, and we've got some that are not. So if you use our tariff tool to check out the goods that you bring in today, it's kind of easy to do. You know, if you're very involved with your supply chain, you've got all your lists in place, you've got those tariff codes at hand. Otherwise, you can get a 7501 entry summary from your broker, see exactly how your goods have been entered, and check it against the list. So I know we're a little bit over today. Really appreciate the time, really appreciate the opportunity to go over this. So many questions, so much interest in this, and we know that there's pain out there. And I wish, you know, we could take some of that away. We'll do our best. Again, we're involved at Strix as a full-service custom house broker. We do self-filing and offer software for you to self-file your customs entry, full customer service from that same brokerage team. Also, if you have further inquiries and you'd like us to perhaps set up a consultation directly so we can specifically look at the details of what you're doing, inquiry@strixsmart.com, and we'll answer those as quickly as we can. I know we've already seen some of those questions come in, but we'd like to thank you. Thank you for attending today. This will be available on a link. It'll be up on both the TRG site, and you'll all get an email to it. And Nick, I think you've got a couple of closing comments here.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Tanner, Travis, Rachel, everyone involved. Again, thank you all for attending. If you have any questions, reach out to Greg and his team at inquiry@strixsmart.com. You can reach out to me, nick.esposito@traderiskguaranty.com. Don't forget, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and most importantly, YouTube. If you want to be notified when this recording goes live on our YouTube channel, subscribe to our YouTube channel. I put a link in the chat feature of the webinar, so look for it there. Click on it, subscribe. Again, thanks for attending.